An orphaned girl burdened with debt just wants a seat in the library, but the man sitting opposite her is a hitman from Chicago's most fearsome criminal organization. And when mysterious gunmen appear to protect her from the shadows, the truth shatters like a bullet through glass. Her father is the city's most powerful crime boss, a man feared by the entire underworld. From that moment, her ordinary life ends forever. Please like and comment with the city you're watching in to let me know how far this story has progressed. And follow along to the end, because the ending will keep you glued to the screen. The rain came down like it had a grudge against Chicago. It wasn't the kind of rain that cleans anything. It hammered the sidewalks in sheets, turned the gutters brown, and drove people indoors with their heads down and their jaws tight. By 7 in the evening, the streets around Blackthorn University looked like something wrung out and left to drip. Sodium lights bleeding orange across wet concrete, the trees along Caldwell Avenue stripped naked by November, their branches clawing at a sky that had nothing left to give. Kira Vale ran. She ran because the number 22 bus had been 12 minutes late and she'd already missed her window, and because the library closed its secondary reading rooms at 9 and she needed every minute of quiet she could steal between now and Thursday's pharmacology exam. She ran with her nursing textbooks crushed against her chest, her canvas bag swinging off one shoulder, the heel of her left boot throwing water with every stride because the sole had been separating since September and she hadn't had the $40 to fix it. She was soaked through before she hit the library steps. The Harmon reading room was on the 3rd floor, past the periodicals and the rows of humming reference terminals that nobody used anymore. It was the only section that stayed reliably warm, the only place in the building where the overhead lights didn't flicker, and on a miserable Tuesday night in mid-November, it was almost empty. 3 other students scattered across the long oak tables, heads buried in laptops or balanced on their arms, already half unconscious from exhaustion. Kira peeled her wet jacket off near the coat hooks and tried not to notice how bad she looked in the reflection of the dark window glass. Hair plastered flat. Mascara from 3 days ago still doing its job, barely. She had not slept more than 5 hours in any single night since the funeral, and it showed in the hollows beneath her eyes and the way her hands moved. Efficient, slightly mechanical, like a person running on a program instead of a pulse. She scanned the room for a table with a working outlet. Most were taken or dead. The long table along the east wall had one available plug, and a single occupant at the far end, which meant she'd be close enough to share the power strip without being in his lap. She started toward it, set her bag down across from him, and pulled her chair back. Then she actually looked at him. He was sitting very still in a way that had nothing to do with studying. His textbook, something on macroeconomic theory, was open in front of him, but his eyes weren't tracking the page. They were up, tracking the room with the kind of quiet, methodical sweep that had nothing to do with looking for a classmate. His coat was charcoal wool, expensive, and he wore it the way men wear things they've stopped noticing, like armor that's been on so long they forget what it feels like to be without it. Dark hair, clean jaw, a shallow scar cutting through the left side of his chin that a razor would have to navigate around. His hands rested on the table in front of the open book. Still. Completely still. He was maybe 28, maybe older, the kind of face that made it hard to tell. When Kira sat down, those eyes came to her, fast, then slow. A quick assessment, 4, 5 points of contact, then settling into something that looked casual and was not. "I'm just using the outlet," she said, because the silence felt like it needed words in it. "I'll stay out of your way." He looked at her for another moment. Something moved behind his expression, a decision getting made, quietly, in a room she wasn't invited into. "Fine," he said. His voice was flat, not unfriendly exactly, just stripped of anything extra. Kira plugged in her laptop, cracked open her pharmacology notes, and made herself stop thinking about him. His name was Adrian Moretti, and he had been sitting in the Harmon reading room for 40 minutes doing nothing that resembled studying. The macroeconomics textbook had been purchased that morning at the campus bookstore for $22. It was a prop. He'd flipped it to a random page before sitting down and hadn't looked at it since. What he had done was count exits, time the library security guard circuit around the 3rd floor. 11 minutes, consistent. and observed the two men on the second-floor mezzanine who were dressed like off-duty middle management and had not turned a single page of their respective books in the last half hour. He'd clocked them within 90 seconds of arriving. They were Vescari men. He recognized the posture, the particular brand of trained stillness that looked like boredom to an untrained eye and looked like readiness to his. One had a radio earpiece that his collar didn't quite cover. The other had positioned himself with sightlines to both staircases and the main elevator bank. They weren't here for him. They hadn't clocked him at all, which meant they weren't expecting DeLuca presence on campus. They were here for someone else. Watching the room with the patience of men who'd been doing this for a long time and were settled into it, Adrian had been working backward through the library's occupants for the last 20 minutes, trying to isolate who they were covering. Then a soaked girl in a broken boot dropped her canvas bag across the table from him and asked to use his outlet. He watched her for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he watched the mezzanine. Both men had shifted, not dramatically, no sudden moves, no reaching for anything, just a subtle reorientation of attention, the way a compass needle moves when North enters the room. They were watching her. Adrian kept his eyes on his fake textbook and felt the particular cold that had nothing to do with the November rain settle in behind his sternum. Kira didn't notice the men on the mezzanine. She was 3 weeks behind on one reading module, and the exam covered drug interactions she was only just beginning to untangle in her head. Her mother had been a nurse for 22 years, and somewhere in the back of Kira's mind there was a version of this path that felt like continuation rather than survival. Like she was doing it for both of them now, carrying the thing her mother had started into a future her mother would never see. Margaret Vale had died in April, 47 years old, a rupture nobody caught in time, and then she was gone inside of 48 hours with Kira sitting in a hospital chair that felt like it was made of concrete, holding a hand that stopped being warm somewhere around 3 in the morning. The grief had not diminished. It had compacted. It sat in the center of Kira's chest like something dense and load-bearing, something she'd built the rest of her functioning life around. She did not fall apart because falling apart was not an available option when you had tuition due and a sublease on a studio apartment that cost $1,100 a month and a student loan balance that climbed like a fever every time she checked it. She was highlighting a passage about beta-adrenergic blockers when the man across the table spoke. "You're in nursing?" She looked up. He wasn't looking at her. He was still oriented toward his book, his jaw resting on one fist. The question had come out of the side of his mouth, low volume, like he'd decided to ask it and wasn't sure why. "Pre-nursing clinicals," she said. "Why?" "Stack of textbooks," he said. "Pharm, anatomy, and what looks like a clinical assessment guide." "And you're in economics," she said, glancing at his book. "Or pretending to be." The stillness shifted. Almost nothing. A slight adjustment in the set of his shoulders, a tightening around the eyes. But she caught it. "Long day," he said. "Sure," Kira said, and went back to her notes. She told herself that was enough. One exchange, neutral, done. She had an exam Thursday and a shift at the campus cafe Friday morning starting at 6, and she could not afford to spend energy on whoever this was, this too-still man in an expensive coat who looked at a room like he was counting escape routes. But 20 minutes later, when she got up to get coffee from the vending bank near the stairwell, she saw him watching her from the corner of her vision, not the open, naked stare of someone interested, something quieter and worse, the kind of surveillance that was automatic, habitual. She got her coffee, came back, and sat down without looking at him. "Do you know anyone here?" he asked, still the same low sideways delivery. "A faculty member. A student. Anyone you're meeting tonight?" Kira set her coffee down slowly. "Why are you asking me that?" "Just making conversation." "That's not a making conversation question." He didn't answer. He picked up his pen and made a mark in the margin of his prop textbook, deliberate, like he was writing something that mattered. When he looked up, his eyes were direct for the first time. "Is there someone waiting for you outside? A friend? A boyfriend? Anyone who knew you'd be here tonight?" The quality of her attention changed. Something in her spine went careful. "No," she said slowly. "I live alone. I didn't tell anyone I was coming here. Why?" He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he looked back at his book. No reason, he said. I'm going to step out for a minute. Don't move tables. He was up and gone before she could respond, sliding out of the chair with an ease that was too practiced for someone his size, moving through the stacks toward the reference section without looking back. Kira stared at the space where he'd been. Then she looked up at the mezzanine. Two men, dark clothing, not reading, looking at her. Adrian found a dead corner behind the art history section and pulled out his phone. He called Sal Greco, who was the closest thing he had to a handler in the DeLuca organization, a thick-shouldered Sicilian who communicated in half sentences and expected you to fill in the rest. I need a name check, Adrian said, keeping his voice below the ambient hum of the HVAC system. Harmon Reading Room, Blackthorn University, female student, 20 or 21, dark brown hair, medium height, nursing program. She's got Vescari protection on her right now. Two men, mezzanine level. I need to know who she is. Silence on the line. Then, you found this yourself? I was already here on the other matter. I ran into her. Two of Roman's men are covering her personally, and they're not announcing it. They don't want her to know. Hold. He waited 4 minutes. He counted them. He heard the distant sound of keyboards, a door, voices that were too far away to parse. Moretti. Sal's voice had dropped half a register. Come in tonight. Don't make contact with the girl. Don't speak to her again. I need the name, Sal. We'll brief you when you get here. I'm not moving until I understand what I'm looking at. Another pause, longer this time. Adrian had learned that the length of Sal's pauses correlated directly with the size of what was being decided. 3 seconds was trivial. 5 seconds was significant. 8 seconds meant someone above Sal was making the call. This pause went to 11. Her name is Vale, Sal finally said. Kira Vale. Mother was Margaret Vale, deceased. Father is listed as unknown on the birth certificate. And in reality? The pause this time was short, just a breath. Roman Vescari. Adrian stood completely still in the art history aisle, with the hum of the ventilation system above him and the distant sounds of a library at night all around him, and he let that land. Roman Vescari had a daughter nobody knew about, a daughter living in a student apartment, working in a campus cafe, taking the bus to the library in broken boots in November rain. A daughter that Roman Vescari had hidden so completely that even the DeLuca syndicate, who had intel on everything and everyone in this city, hadn't found her until now. He put the phone back in his pocket and stood there another moment longer. Until now. He came back to the table and sat down. Kira was still there, her coffee going cold beside her highlighted notes, her expression carefully arranged into something that looked like concentration and wasn't. The men on the mezzanine, she said without looking up. You're going to tell me I imagined them. No, he said. She looked up then. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, more like the particular feeling of a door you weren't sure was real turning out to have a handle. Who are they? She said. They work for someone. Someone who's been keeping you covered without letting you know. Keeping me... She stopped, recalibrated. That's not possible. How long have you been at Blackthorn? 2 years? And before that? I went to Harker Community College for a year. Before that, I was at Lincoln Prep on the South Side. Any memory, he said carefully, of men who stayed near you? Security that didn't seem official? Cars you saw more than once? Her mouth opened, closed. Something moving behind her eyes now. Pieces she'd stored as unrelated, dragging themselves toward each other. There was a man outside my high school, she said slowly. Tall, gray jacket. He was there almost every day for 2 years, but I never saw him go inside. I assumed he was a maintenance contractor or... She stopped. I assumed a lot of things. Kira. The first time he'd used her name. She registered that. Your mother. What did she tell you about your father? The shift in her face was immediate and hard to watch. The defensive contraction that happens when something has been stored in a pressure vessel and someone knocks on the wall. She said he was someone she met when she was young, Kira said. Someone she couldn't be with. Someone who lived a life she wanted no part of. Her voice stayed even. She said it was better that I didn't know who he was. I stopped asking when I was 12. Did she ever use the name Viscari? The blood left Kira's face so cleanly and completely that for a moment she looked like someone had switched a light off behind her eyes. She knew the name. Of course she knew the name. Everyone in Chicago who was old enough to read a newspaper and intelligent enough to understand what they were reading knew the name Viscari. It existed in the city the way certain weather events existed, not openly acknowledged, but always present at the edge of consciousness, a force that organized other forces. "You need to tell me what you know," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Right now. You need to tell me everything." Adrian looked at her across the oak table, under the steady fluorescent light, in the warm reading room while rain hammered the windows, and two of her father's men watched from one floor below. He had not decided what he was going to do yet. The honest thing, and he was not often honest, not in the life he'd been living for 6 years, was that he was still making the calculation. Sal had told him not to make contact. The DeLuca organization had an interest in this girl that had nothing to do with her welfare, and he was a DeLuca enforcer sitting across a table from Roman Viscari's unknown daughter, holding information that could end her life or detonate a war that would crack this city open. He had done terrible things in 6 years. He had done them without hesitation and without sentiment and without losing much sleep. He had convinced himself that the life he was living was the only life available to someone built the way he was built. Too angry for legitimate employment, too damaged from 2 tours in places the government would rather not specify, too good at violence to waste it on anything ordinary. He looked at Kira Vale, who had lost her mother 8 months ago and was studying pharmacology alone in a library on a Tuesday night in broken boots, and he felt something corrode in the machinery. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and after I tell you, you're not going to be able to unhear it." "Tell me," she said. "Your father is alive," he said. "Your father is Roman Viscari, and the men on that mezzanine work for him. They've been covering you since at least high school, probably longer. Your mother hid you from him, or from what came with him. But the protection followed you anyway." Kira said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, "You said that like you know him." "I know of him," Adrian said, which was almost true. "Why are you telling me this?" And there it was. The question he didn't have a clean answer to, because the clean answer was that he shouldn't be telling her anything, that he should be calling Sal back, confirming the identification, and letting the DeLuca machine process what came next. The clean answer was that he was a soldier in an organization that would look at her and see leverage, and that his job was to stay a soldier. He picked up his pen, set it back down. "Because," he said, and stopped. In the 3 seconds of silence that followed, his phone buzzed twice against his thigh. He pulled it out and read the message beneath the table. It was from Sal. 4 words. "They know about the girl." His chest went cold. He looked up. He looked at the mezzanine. The 2 Viscari men were still there, but something had changed in their posture. Something had activated. One of them had his hand beneath his jacket, not drawing, just resting. They'd received something too. Adrian did the math in 3 seconds. If the DeLucas had gotten wind of her identity at the same time he had, if word had moved up the chain faster than he expected, if Luca had already decided to move, tonight, now, before anyone could adjust, he pushed his chair back and stood up. "Get your coat," he said. Kira looked up at him. "What?" "Get your coat right now." His voice had changed, not loud, not panicked, stripped to the bone. "Leave the textbooks. Bring your bag." "I'm not going anywhere until you—" "Kira." He said it the way he'd been trained to say things when there was no time left for argument. Flat, absolute, containing everything he couldn't explain. "The men watching you from the mezzanine are about to have company, and the company coming is not here to protect you." She looked at him. Something in her had already decided before the rest of her caught up. He could see it in the way her body shifted, loading weight forward, preparing. She grabbed her bag. They were moving before she'd finished standing, Adrian keeping himself between her and the mezzanine, steering them toward the service stairwell at the back of the reading room rather than the main stairs. His hand found the small of her back once. Not a grip, just direction. And then he was ahead of her, pushing through the fire door. Behind them, He heard the distinct click and scuff of someone moving fast on the mezzanine level. The stairwell was cold and smelled like concrete dust and cleaning products. They went down 2 flights in the dark, his hand on the railing, her breath loud beside him. Not panicking, just hard, physical effort. At the ground floor, he stopped with his back flat against the door, listened for 3 seconds, then pushed it open slowly. The back corridor ran past the mailroom and the maintenance bay to a loading dock that led out onto the service alley behind the building. He'd mapped this in the first 5 minutes after arriving. Old habit. Never useful until suddenly it was all you had. "My car is 2 blocks north," he said as they stepped into the alley. Rain hit them instantly. "Don't run. Walk fast. If anyone comes toward us, stay behind me." "You have a gun," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "Who are you?" she said. The rain was in his eyes. 2 blocks away, past the dumpsters and the recycled paper bins and a parked delivery van, his car was sitting where he'd left it. 2 blocks felt like a very long distance. "Later," he said. "No," she said, grabbing his arm and stopping them both in the alley with rain hammering the asphalt around them and the yellow light from the service door cutting a stripe across her face. "Right now. Because I'm not getting in a car with someone who won't tell me who they are." He looked at her. This girl who had been sitting alone in a library trying to learn pharmacology, who had lost her mother in April, who had spent her whole life inside a secret that was kept from her by everyone who was supposed to protect her. He could see the fear in her. It was real, and she wasn't hiding it. But she was standing in the rain holding her ground in a dark alley, and that was something he hadn't expected. "My name is Adrian Moretti," he said. 6 years ago, I left the military and I went to work for the DeLuca family. I'm an enforcer. I came to Blackthorn tonight because my organization sent me to find out who you were." He held her gaze, gave her all of it. "And I just found out who you are, at the same moment the people I work for found out. Which means we have about 4 minutes before this alley stops being empty." The rain fell between them. Kira Vale looked at the man who had just told her he was her enemy, standing in the alley behind the library where she'd been trying to study pharmacology on a Tuesday night, with the pieces of her entire life reorganizing themselves into a shape she didn't recognize. She breathed. 4 minutes, she said. "Then let's stop wasting them." She walked ahead of him into the rain toward his car, and Adrian Moretti, who had not been surprised by anything in 6 years, stood 1 full second in the dark before he followed. 3 blocks away, at the corner of Caldwell Avenue and Morrison Street, a black SUV with its headlights off pulled slowly to the curb. Then another one. Then a third. The car was a black Audi A6, 4 years old, with a cracked dashboard vent and a faint smell of gun oil and cigarettes that had been stubbed out a long time ago. Adrian had it moving before Kira finished pulling her door shut, cutting south down the service alley without lights, until he hit the cross street, then swinging north with the headlights coming on in the same motion, smooth and automatic, like someone who had left places quickly before and had stopped thinking about the mechanics of it. Kira sat with her bag in her lap and said nothing for 45 seconds. She was counting. She didn't know why. Maybe because counting was something her mind could do while the rest of it tried to rebuild the floor that had just dropped out from under her entire life. 45 seconds. Then, "They're following us." Adrian checked the mirror. One of them. The other 2 are probably moving to cut off the route to the expressway. "So where are we going?" "Not the expressway." He turned east, then south again, threading through the back streets of the University District with the confidence of someone who had learned a city the way soldiers learn terrain, not for pleasure, but for survival. Identifying choke points and escape corridors before you ever needed them. The rain was heavier now, the wipers working hard, and the streetlights smeared across the wet road in long orange streaks that looked like something burning. Kira turned in her seat and looked through the rear window. Headlights, 2 blocks back, keeping pace without closing the distance, patient, professional. "They're not trying to stop us," she said. "Not yet. They want to see where I take you." "And where are you taking me?" "I'm figuring that out." She turned back around, looked at the side of his face, the scar on his jaw, the muscle working in his cheek, the way his hand sat on the wheel at 9 and 3, with a steadiness that was not calm, but was something that had been built out of the same material as calm. She had spent 2 years in nursing clinicals learning to read bodies under stress. His told her a specific story. This was a man who went quiet when things got dangerous. Not frozen quiet, operational quiet. The kind that meant his entire nervous system had narrowed itself down to the problem directly in front of him. "Adrian," she said. He didn't look at her. "The DeLuca family," she said. "You said they sent you to find out who I was. Past tense. You found out an hour ago, which means they found out an hour ago. What are they going to do with that?" The muscle in his cheek moved again. "Adrian?" "I don't know yet," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." "Then give me your best guess. You work for them. You've worked for them for 6 years. What does a criminal organization do when they find out the most powerful man in the city has a hidden daughter nobody knew about?" He was quiet for 3 seconds. The car moved through a yellow light, and he didn't slow down. "They use her," he said. The words sat in the car like a stone dropped in still water. Kira felt the ripple of it move through her and made herself stay still. She had a clinical trick she'd learned in her first practical placement. When a patient codes and everyone around you starts to come apart, you find one fixed point in the room and you breathe toward it. She found the crack in the dashboard vent and breathed toward it. "Use me how?" she said. "Leverage against Roman. If you're his blood and he's spent 20 years hiding you, he'll do almost anything to keep you alive and out of DeLuca hands." He paused, or that's the assumption they're operating on. "And is it true?" He said nothing. "Is it true?" she said again, sharper. "Would he? A man who never acknowledged I existed, who let my mother raise me alone in a 2-bedroom apartment while she worked doubles at a hospital. Would that man burn his empire down to protect a daughter he's never spoken to? I don't know Roman Viscari. But you know men like him." He glanced at her then, just once, just a flicker, before his eyes went back to the road. "Men like him built everything they have by deciding early what they're willing to lose and what they're not. Your mother kept you hidden from him for a reason, and he kept his men on you for 20 years for a reason. What that adds up to..." He stopped, moved his jaw. "I don't know." Kira looked out the windshield at the rain-hammered city. "My mother used to get a cashier's check in the mail every month," she said. "No return address. Always the same amount, $4,000. She never cashed them. She kept them in a shoebox in her closet. I found them after she died. 41 of them, still sealed." She let out a short breath through her nose. "I thought they were from an ex-boyfriend she was too proud to take money from. I thought a lot of things." He didn't respond. He was watching the mirror again. "What?" she said. "We have a problem." She looked. The single set of headlights had been joined by 2 more, and they were no longer holding distance. He took them down into Lower Walker. It was the move she wouldn't have predicted. Instead of pushing toward the expressway or heading for a populated area, he dropped them into the underbelly of the city, the 2-level underground road system that ran beneath the main grid like a second nervous system, gray and low-ceilinged and perpetually damp, lit by industrial fixtures spaced far enough apart that the spaces between them were genuine dark. Trucks used it. Delivery vehicles. People who needed to cross the city without anyone seeing them cross. The pursuing headlights didn't follow them down. Kira watched them vanish in the mirror as the ramp curved underground, and she felt the very specific relief of a threat temporarily removed and understood it was just that. Temporary. "They'll pick us up when we surface," Adrian said, because she was about to say it. "But it buys us about 4 minutes. 4 minutes to do what? To sort out what happens next." He pulled the car to the shoulder in a stretch of Lower Walker between 2 parked semi-trucks, killed the headlights, left the engine running. Underground, the rain was a memory. It was very quiet except for the distant sound of a truck somewhere deeper in the system and the tick of the cooling engine block. He turned to face her. This was the first time since the library that they'd looked at each other without something else demanding attention, and in the dim reflected light coming off the concrete overhead, Kira could see his face clearly enough to look for what his voice had been hiding. She found more than she expected, something behind the operational composure that was doing its best to stay compressed. It wasn't guilt exactly. Guilt implied surprise. It was something older and more corroded. The look of a man who had arrived somewhere he'd been heading for a long time and didn't like the destination. "Say it," she said. He held her gaze. "I was sent to Blackthorn 6 weeks ago. Not tonight, 6 weeks ago. My job was to confirm certain patterns, where you went, who you talked to, whether you had any contact with your father's organization. I was supposed to identify any weaknesses that could be—" He stopped, started again. "That could be used." The heating system ran. Somewhere far above them, Chicago went on existing. 6 weeks, Kira said. "Yes." "You've been watching me for 6 weeks." "Yes." "The coffee place on Archer Avenue," she said slowly. "The man at the corner table, dark coat, reading the same section of the Tribune 3 times." Something moved in his face. "The library before tonight," she continued. Her voice had gone very level, the way it went level when she was clinical, working through a differential. 3 weeks ago, 2nd floor, you were near the periodicals. I thought you were a grad student I'd seen before. I have a good memory for faces." She paused. "I didn't put it together because I had no reason to." "No," he said. "You didn't. But you were watching me, building a profile for the DeLucas." "Yes." "And then tonight." "Tonight," he said, "I got the call that they'd confirmed your identity through other channels. And the order I received after that—" He stopped again. His jaw was working on something that tasted bad. "The order was to move to the next phase." "Which was what?" Kira said. "Luca DeLuca wants you taken alive. He wants to put you on camera in a location his people control and send what they film to your father, as a demonstration that they can reach what Roman Viscari loves." He said it without decoration, without softening it, which she understood was its own form of respect. "I was supposed to be the mechanism, the person you'd already started to trust." Kira sat with that for a moment. She was aware of her own breathing, slow, controlled. Something in her chest had gone tight and hot, but it wasn't panic. She recognized panic, she'd treated it in patience and felt it herself and knew its particular texture. This was different. This was the specific feeling of realizing that the floor you thought you were standing on was a drawing of a floor on top of nothing, and that you'd been walking on it for weeks without knowing, and that the man who'd drawn it was currently sitting 2 feet away from you telling you all about it. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I'm not going to do it." "That's not an answer to the question." "It's the only answer I've got, Kira." "Don't—" She stopped, pulled a breath, started again. "Don't use my name like we're friends. We are not friends. You've been surveilling me for 6 weeks for a criminal organization that now wants to kidnap me and torture me on camera." Her voice was absolutely steady, which cost her something she didn't name. "So I need you to answer my actual question. Why are you telling me this instead of doing it?" He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she stopped waiting for the answer and started paying attention to the silence itself, to what it contained. "Because I watched you," he said finally. 6 weeks of watching you. I watched you work a 6-hour shift and go straight to a 4-hour study session. I watched you sit by yourself in a cafeteria eating a sandwich and reading about patient assessment. I watched you at the bus stop in the rain because your boot sole was coming off and you couldn't afford to fix it, and you just—" He stopped. His voice had developed an edge it hadn't had before, and she understood that it was directed inward. "You just stood there in the rain, not feeling sorry for yourself. Just standing there waiting for the bus." Silence. "That's not a reason?" she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not. So give me the reason." "I don't have one that holds up," he said. "I'm a DeLuca enforcer. I have been for 6 years. I've done things for that organization that I don't defend and don't lose sleep over, which is its own problem. And I'm sitting here because—" He ran one hand over his face, rough, impatient with himself. "Because somewhere in 6 weeks of watching you grind through your life, I stopped being able to make the math work. The thing they want to do to you, I can't make the math work." Kira said nothing. "That's it," he said. "That's the whole answer. It's not noble. It barely makes sense. But there it is." She looked at him for a moment longer, then she looked straight ahead through the windshield at the gray concrete wall of Lower Walker, at the grease-stained city underbelly that most people never saw. "What happens to you," she said, When Luca finds out you didn't follow the order. He was quiet. Adrian. Nothing good, he said. Define that. Men who go off script in that organization don't get warning letters. So you've ended your own life in that world by pulling me out of that library? Probably, yes. And you did it anyway? Evidently. She turned her head and looked at him again. There was something recalibrating behind her eyes. Not softening, nothing like that, but a reassessment, a diagnostic shift. She was filing something. Okay, she said. So what do we do now? I need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere the DeLucas don't have eyes. Where does that leave? A few options, none of them perfect. He pulled his phone out, stared at it, put it back. There are people who owe me. A place in Pilsen off the grid. We could go there, reassess, make contact with... He stopped. With my father, she said. The words sat differently in her mouth than they had before. Harder. More weight to them. Possibly, Adrian said. I don't know this man, she said. I don't know anything about him except what I've read in newspapers and what you've just told me, which means I know he's someone who keeps secrets and deploys armed men and apparently felt it was sufficient to mail my mother unsigned checks she never cashed rather than... She stopped herself. Controlled something. Rather than any of the alternatives. He may have thought it was protecting you. He was wrong. Yes, Adrian said. He probably was. Something in his steadiness when he said that, the complete absence of argument, the simple acknowledgement, shifted something minor in her assessment of him. Not enough to matter, just enough to register. Does he know about tonight? She asked. His men on the mezzanine will have already called it in, so, yes. He knows you were in a library with a DeLuca operative who pulled you out the back. He doesn't know... He paused, thought about something. He doesn't know what side I'm standing on right now. Do you know what side you're standing on right now? He met her eyes. Yes, he said. A truck groaned past them on Lower Walker, its cargo rocking, headlights sweeping the ceiling. In the seconds after it passed, the underground was very still. Then Adrian's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face didn't change. He showed her the screen, SAL. Your handler, she said. Yes? Answer it. He looked at her. Answer it, she said again. I want to hear what they say. He held the phone between them and answered on speaker. The connection was slightly hollow, the way calls always were underground. Moretti. Sal's voice was flat and had something moving just beneath it that Adrian recognized. Not anger, something more careful than anger. Where are you? Moving, Adrian said. We've got eyes on 2 Vescari men who said you pulled the girl out of the library. I need you to tell me where you are right now. I'm handling it. A pause. Adrian, I need a location. I heard you. Luca is asking me directly. He wants confirmation of the package before midnight. Package. Kira heard the word and didn't move a muscle. Tell Luca I'll have an update within the hour, Adrian said. That's not... Within the hour, Sal. He ended the call. Silence. Package, Kira said. Yes. That's what I am to them. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. That's what you were to them, before tonight. And now? He started the engine. Now you're the reason I need to figure out the next 8 hours very carefully. She pulled her seatbelt back across. Her hands were steady. She was slightly amazed by this, the steadiness of her own hands, and filed it away the same way she filed everything, for later examination when there was time. There's something you haven't told me yet, she said. He checked the mirror, then pulled off the shoulder and back into the underground lane. The warehouse meeting, she said. You said your organization sent you 6 weeks ago to build a profile, but tonight felt like something moved faster than expected, like a timeline accelerated. She watched his face. Was there a meeting before you came to the library? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Luca DeLuca called a meeting this afternoon, he said. Fulton Market. He had photographs of you leaving the library last week, of your apartment building, of your schedule. He paused. He'd been building the same profile independently. When he laid it out, it was clear he'd had more than one source. More than one source, she said slowly, meaning someone other than you was also watching me. Yes. Someone inside the Viscari organization? Possibly. Or someone closer to you. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what did Lucas say he wanted to do with me? In the meeting, exactly. The ramp ahead curved upward, toward street level, toward the rain and the city and the 3 black SUVs that were certainly still up there somewhere, patient and professional, waiting for them to surface. He wants to put you in a room, Adrian said. Film it. Send it to your father, not just to demand the shipping ports. He wants to break Roman Viscari, publicly. He wants footage that proves to every organization in the city that Roman can't protect what he loves. He looked at the ramp ahead. And he said something else. What? He said that after Roman surrenders the ports, there's no reason to keep you alive. He said it without inflection, clinical, like she had been clinical. He was very clear about that part. The car climbed the ramp. The rain hit the windshield again, immediate and cold. Chicago opened up around them. Lit windows, wet streets, the distant red and blue of emergency vehicles somewhere to the north. And there, at the first intersection above ground, a black SUV sitting at the corner with its lights off turned them on. Then another one appeared at the far end of the block. Adrian's hands tightened on the wheel. Hold on, he said. Adrian? The third SUV came out of a parking structure to their right. All 3 were moving. But something was wrong with the geometry. The angles were off. The approach vectors weren't converging on Adrian's car. They were converging on a point half a block behind them, near the mouth of the lower Wacker ramp, and in the space of 2 seconds, Adrian understood that this wasn't about him and Kira at all. Something else was happening. A figure appeared on the sidewalk to their left. Tall, moving fast, a silver revolver catching the streetlight. The man wasn't looking at their car. He was looking at the SUVs, and he was already raising the weapon. Then the first shot came. Not from him, from the lead SUV. And it blew out the window of a parked van and everything. The silver revolver fired 3 times in the space of 2 seconds, and the lead SUV's front tire exploded, sending the vehicle into a grinding skid that jumped the curb and took out a fire hydrant in a burst of pressurized water that caught the streetlight and turned briefly silver before the cold swallowed it. Adrian had already moved. Hard left, accelerating into the gap between the second SUV and the parked delivery trucks lining the street, threading the Audi through a space that wasn't quite wide enough and made it wide enough anyway, the side mirror folding back on impact with someone's bumper, the car rocking but moving, always moving. Kira had both hands braced on the dashboard. She did not scream. She registered this about herself with a distant, almost academic surprise. The absence of the scream, the way her body had gone into something that felt less like fear and more like compression, everything narrowing down to the immediate physics of survival. "The man with the revolver," she said. "Viscari," Adrian said. "One of Roman's. He just shot out an SUV tire in the middle of... He's covering us. Someone told him where we'd surface." Adrian checked the mirror, took a right without slowing. "Or he was already tracking you, and this is the response." Behind them, the street erupted. She could hear it even through the closed windows and the rain. The particular sound of a firefight at close range in an urban corridor, which she had never heard before tonight and would never be able to unhear. A sound that was less like the movies and more like something structural failing, like a building making sounds buildings shouldn't make. Glass, metal. And underneath it, smaller sounds she didn't let herself categorize. Adrian drove them 4 blocks north before the sounds faded enough to think around. "Where are we going?" she said. "Pilsen, I know a place." He was checking every mirror in rotation. "Vest, off the grid, someone who keeps his mouth shut." "Vest?" "Safe house, old word for it." "You said someone told the Viscari man where we'd surface." "Yes." "Who knew we'd come up that ramp?" He was quiet for a beat. "That's the right question." "Answer it." "I only told Sal I was moving. I didn't specify direction or route. The ramp we took is the one I'd use if I needed underground coverage fast. It's a known tactical move for people who know this city." He paused. "Which means whoever sent that man to cover us understands how I operate. Or understands how DeLuca operatives operate in general. Maybe, he said, but his voice had a quality she was learning to read, the particular flatness that meant he was holding something back while he decided what to do with it. Say the rest, she said. Sal knew I was underground. He didn't know the route, but Sal reports to Luca, and Luca... He stopped, moved his jaw. There are people inside DeLuca's operation who have been feeding information across the line for years. It happens in every organization. The question is which direction the feed runs. You think someone inside DeLuca tipped Viscari's men? I think someone wanted us covered coming out of that ramp, Adrian said. Whether that's protection or herding, I don't know yet. Kira sat with that. Outside, the city moved past in wet amber and gray, the late-night traffic thin, the streets beginning to quiet toward midnight. She thought about her mother's shoebox. 41 sealed cashier's checks. She thought about a man in a gray jacket standing outside her high school for 2 years, and how she'd looked at him every day and seen a maintenance contractor, because that was the explanation that fit the world she understood. She was done fitting things into the world she understood. The safe house in Pilsen was a narrow 2-flat on a street of narrow 2 flats, indistinguishable from its neighbors, except for the security camera above the door that was painted to look like a junction box. Adrian knocked 4 times, waited, knocked once more. The man who opened the door was in his 60s, compact, with the kind of face that had been weathered by something other than age. A specific erosion that came from decades of proximity to bad situations. He looked at Adrian, then at Kira, then back at Adrian with an expression that said several things without saying any of them. One night, Adrian said. The man stepped back. They went in. His name was Denny, and that was all Kira got. He showed them a back room with a folding table, 2 chairs, and a cot with a gray wool blanket, then left them alone with a pot of coffee going cold on a hot plate and the particular silence of a place that had been used for things that didn't get discussed. Kira poured herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window that looked out on the narrow gangway between buildings. The rain had slowed to a mist. Under the single exterior light, the concrete looked like wet skin. Adrian sat at the table and put his phone face down on it and looked at his hands. She watched him for a moment. He had a cut above his left ear she hadn't noticed before. Small, from the mirror impact probably. A thin black line at his hairline that had dried without bleeding much. He hadn't mentioned it, probably hadn't noticed. She pulled a paper towel from the roll on the counter, wetted it at the small sink, and crossed the room and held it out. He looked at it, looked at her. Your head, she said. Above the ear. He took the towel, pressed it to the spot. His eyes went somewhere else for a moment. Not distant exactly, just briefly interior, like a man touching a wall to remember where the room ends. Thank you, he said. First time he'd said that to her. Don't thank me, she said. I need you functional. She sat down across from him with her coffee. Now tell me what you're not saying. He looked at the paper towel, set it on the table. I've been running the list of people who knew my location patterns, who knew about the ramp, who would have both the motive to cover us and the access to get a Viscari man positioned in time. And there are 4 people in the DeLuca organization who fit all 3 conditions, he said. One of them is Sal. Your handler. My handler. The man I've reported to for 6 years. He said it evenly, but something beneath the evenness had developed a texture. Sal has been with DeLuca for 22 years. He's the institutional memory of the organization. He knows every operative, every route, every protocol. You think he's feeding information to Viscari? I think someone is, and the someone has to be positioned high enough to know tactical detail and low enough to avoid Luca's scrutiny. He looked at her. Sal fits that precisely. What would he get from it? Survival insurance. The DeLuca organization is unstable right now. Luca is impulsive. He makes decisions that create exposure. Men like Sal, men who've been in the life long enough to see organizations fall apart, they build relationships on both sides of the line. Contingency plans. He paused. Or he genuinely thinks Luca is going to get everyone killed and he's managing a soft transition. By feeding Roman Viscari information about his own daughter. By making sure Roman's people were positioned to prevent a DeLuca grab that would start a war nobody survives. He held her gaze. If Luca gets his hands on you and does what he plans to do, Roman's response won't be negotiation. It'll be scorched earth. Sal knows that. Any rational person in that organization knows that. Kira absorbed this. So Sal positioned the Viscari man to intercept us, to make sure I didn't get taken tonight. That's the theory. Which means Sal is managing this situation from inside DeLuca's organization. Which means, Adrian said carefully, that Sal knows exactly where we are right now. The room was very quiet. Then Adrian's phone, face down on the table, vibrated once. He turned it over, read it. His face did something that was almost nothing. A slight tightening around the eyes, a compression at the corners of his mouth. And she understood in that moment that it was something bad. He passed her the phone. The message was from a number with no contact name, 4 words and an address. He knows about the girl. 4114. South Rockwell. The address, she said. Viscari Estate, Adrian said. South side. It's a fortress. Stone. Gated. The kind of perimeter you build when you expect people to try to come through it. He took the phone back. Someone is telling us to go there. Someone meaning Sal. Someone meaning whoever sent this message from a clean number. Is it a trap? She said. It could be. Or it's Roman Viscari trying to reach his daughter through the only channel that's still open. Also possible. She set her coffee down, stood up, walked to the window and back, once, the way she walked when she was working through something in her head. 4 steps, turn, 4 steps, a circuit her body used to help her think. Adrian watched her do it without comment. If we go there, she said, we walk into a compound controlled by a man I've never met who has more reason to distrust you than to trust you. Yes. If we don't go there, we sit in this room until either DeLuca finds us or we run out of options. That's the shape of it. Then there's no real choice, she said. There's just the thing we do and the things we tell ourselves about why. She pulled her jacket off the back of the chair. Call Denny, she said. I need to clean this cut on your head properly before we go anywhere. I'm not walking into a Mafia compound with someone dripping blood on the floor. The Viscari estate announced itself before you could see it. It was the quality of the stillness around it, the way the surrounding block had a specific absence of civilian traffic at midnight, the way the parked cars along the street had too much space between them, the way the shadows in the doorways across from the iron gates had the weight of people in them, rather than just darkness. Adrian parked a block and a half short and sat with the engine off. They'll have clocked us already, he said. I know. When we get to the gate, let me... No, Kira said. I go first. He looked at her. He's my father, she said, whatever that means. And whoever is watching from those doorways is going to make a decision about whether to shoot you in the first 3 seconds. The only thing that changes that calculation is me being in front. He wanted to argue. She could see it, the operational resistance to putting her forward, the instinct toward positioning that had been drilled in over years of doing this kind of work. But underneath the instinct was the recognition that she was right, and they both knew it. Stay in my peripheral, she said, and don't reach for anything. She got out of the car. The walk to the gate was 40 yards across wet pavement, under a sky that had stopped raining and was now just sitting overhead, low and dense and pressing. She felt the watchers in the doorways the way you feel eyes on the back of your neck, a specific temperature change, a directional awareness her body had apparently always had and never had reason to use before tonight. She stopped at the intercom mounted in the gate pillar, pressed the button. 5 seconds of silence. Then a voice, male, flat, accented faintly with something she couldn't place. Name. Kira Vale, she said. My mother was Margaret Vale. Tell Roman Viscari his daughter is at his gate. Silence. Much longer this time. 30 seconds, 40. She stood in the cold with her arms at her sides and her shoulders level and made herself breathe at a normal rate. The gate opened. Not slowly. All at once, electric motors driving it back in a single controlled movement, and beyond it a stone drive lined with low lights, leading to a house that used the word house the way mountains use the word hill, technically applicable and entirely insufficient. 3 stories, pale stone, every window lit from within. A man appeared from the left side of the gate, 6 feet 2, built like someone who'd stopped being athletic and become architectural, gray at the temples, a scar across the bridge of his nose. He looked at Kira with an expression she couldn't read. Then he looked past her at Adrian. His hand moved toward his jacket. "He's with me," Kira said. "He's DeLuca," the man said. "He's with me," she said again, and held the man's eyes with something she hadn't known she possessed until tonight. A specific quality of stillness that refused to be argued with. The man's hand stopped. He looked at her for another moment with the recalibrating expression of someone who had expected one thing and encountered another. "Vincent Raynor," he said finally, not as an introduction but as a statement of what he was, what she was looking at. The name landed. She'd heard it, she now understood, referenced obliquely in things her mother had said over the years. Some people can't leave the life they're born into. Some men are made for exactly one thing. "Vincent," she said, "take us inside." The room they were brought to was at the back of the house, a study, walls of books and framed maps of the Great Lakes shipping system, a desk the size of a small country. The man behind the desk stood when they entered. He stood the way men stand when something has happened that overrides protocol, not a social reflex, something deeper, something the body does before the mind catches up. Roman Viscari was 61 years old and looked like a man who had absorbed 61 years of consequence and carried it in his face rather than being bent by it. Heavy jaw, dark eyes, gray at his temples, and in the short beard he kept close to his face. He was wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, which told her they'd pulled him out of something. A late meeting, a late dinner, something that had been ongoing when the gate call came. His hands, she noticed, were very large and very still on the edge of the desk. He looked at her. She looked at him. And in the precise geometry of that moment, the space between two people recognizing in each other something they had been told didn't exist, Kira felt something move in her chest that she refused, immediately and completely, to call anything that would make her vulnerable to it. "Kira," he said. One word, in a voice that had clearly given many orders and now didn't know what to do with itself. "You can skip the part where you lose your composure," she said. "We don't have time for it." Something happened in his face, a reorganization. And then, beneath the shock and the sentiment he'd been about to express, something else emerged. Something that recognized itself in what it was looking at. Recognition of a different kind. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand," she said, "and so will he." She indicated Adrian without looking at him. "He is the reason I am alive tonight and not in a DeLuca holding location on camera. You'll extend him the same courtesy you extend me." Roman's eyes moved to Adrian, stayed there for 5 full seconds, reading something in him that Adrian let him read without flinching. "You're Moretti," Roman said. "Yes," Adrian said. "I know your work. I'd imagine. You were on my daughter for 6 weeks without my people catching you." "Your people caught me the first night," Adrian said. "They chose not to act. I assumed they were reporting to you." Roman looked at him for another moment. Then he sat back down. He gestured to the chairs across from his desk, and this time Kira sat, because what was coming needed to be said sitting down. "Tell me what Luca DeLuca said in that warehouse," Roman said. "I wasn't in the warehouse," Adrian said. "I got the brief secondhand from Sal Greco." "Then tell me what Sal told you." "Luca wants the East Side shipping contracts, all of them. He wants control of the Port Authority contacts you've built over the last 15 years. And he wants to broadcast to every organization in this city that he can take what you love." He paused. "That's the priority. Taking the ports is secondary to the demonstration." Roman's face didn't change. Kira watched him for any sign of the emotion that had been in his eyes 30 seconds ago and found it gone. Packed away with the efficiency of someone who had been packing things away for decades. He was looking at Adrian with the focused intensity of a man running a calculation. "You said Sal briefed you," Roman said. "Not Luca directly." "Yes." "How long have you worked directly under Sal?" 6 years. "And in 6 years, how often did Luca brief operatives directly rather than through Sal?" Adrian paused. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just the slight adjustment of a man who has just been shown a corner of a room he didn't know existed. Almost never, he said. Luca uses intermediaries for everything, plausible distance. So when Sal told you about Luca's plan for my daughter, Roman said, leaning slightly forward, you took it as a direct representation of what Luca wants. Yes. And everything you've done tonight, pulling her from the library, going underground, coming here, has been based on that brief. Yes, Adrian said, and now his voice had developed the specific quality of a man who senses that the ground under his feet has begun to behave differently, but hasn't yet identified in what direction it intends to give way. Roman looked at Kira. There's something you need to know, he said. There are many things I need to know, she said. Start with the most important one. He opened the desk drawer and placed a photograph on the surface between them, facing her. She leaned forward and looked at it. It was a surveillance photograph. Grainy, shot from distance, but clear enough. A parking structure, 2 figures in conversation beside a dark car. One of the figures was Sal Greco. She recognized him from Adrian's description and from the way Adrian's body had gone absolutely still beside her. The other figure was someone she did not recognize. Who is that? She said. That, Roman said, is Carlo Vescari, my brother. He let that land. My brother, who has been sharing information about this family's operations with the DeLuca organization for approximately 8 months. He let a beat pass, including information about you, including your location, your schedule, your identity, which the DeLuca organization did not discover independently. They were given it. The room was absolutely silent. Kira looked at the photograph. She looked at the 2 figures caught in grainy surveillance light, leaning toward each other with the body language of men who have been in conversation for a long time and are comfortable in it. She looked at Roman. Your brother, she said, someone inside your own family. Yes. Gave them information about me. Yes. And Sal Greco is his contact inside DeLuca. Yes. She turned and looked at Adrian. His face had the particular quality she was beginning to associate with him at his most honest. Stripped clean, nothing performing, just the thing itself. He was staring at the photograph with the expression of a man who has just had 6 years of his life recontextualized in 30 seconds. Every order Sal had given him, every route, every brief, every operation. Running back through it now in fast reverse, looking for the moments where the information had flowed in a direction that hadn't registered as wrong at the time, but registered as catastrophically wrong right now. Sal knew who I was, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. Sal knew who she was the moment you called him from the library, Roman said, and his job, the thing Carlo paid him to do, was to ensure that the DeLuca organization moved on her tonight, before I could intervene. He paused. The 3 SUVs tonight weren't a response to your call. They were already in position. Sal had already given the order before you got off the phone. Adrian pulled one slow breath through his nose and let it out through his mouth. The call telling me to come in, he said. He was trying to get me clear before the operation started, so I wouldn't interfere. Yes. And when I didn't come in, he adapted, Roman said. He let the operation run and planned to tell Luca that you'd gone rogue. Kira watched Adrian process this. She watched it move through him. Not the theatrical breakdown of a man in a movie discovering betrayal, but the real thing, which was quieter and worse. The specific expression of someone recalculating the architecture of their own history. Why? He said finally. Carlo, your brother, why does he want power? Roman said simply. The kind that doesn't share well. He closed the desk drawer. Carlo believes that if the DeLuca organization holds this city's shipping infrastructure, and if I am compromised by what happens to my daughter, the resulting reorganization creates space for him to consolidate independently. He wants to rebuild from the wreckage. His jaw tightened, barely perceptibly. He has wanted this for a long time. He has simply been waiting for the right instrument. And the right instrument was me, Kira said. Roman looked at her. His eyes had the quality of someone looking at something they caused and cannot undo, and have decided to stop pretending isn't their fault. The right instrument, he said quietly, was everything I failed to protect. Kira stood up from the chair. She walked to the window, large, overlooking the rear of the estate, a garden that was gray and sleeping under the winter sky. She stood with her back to both of them and looked out at the dark. She was thinking about her mother. She was thinking about the shoebox. She was thinking about a woman who had worked doubles at a hospital and kept sealed checks in a closet and never once in 20 years said the name Vescari in her daughter's presence. A woman who had built a life that was small and honest and entirely constructed to keep one specific piece of information from traveling in a specific direction. She had not succeeded. Someone had found it anyway. Someone who wore the same name as the man standing behind Kira in this room, who owed her nothing and had given her nothing except armed men in shadows and unsigned money she hadn't known about until she was alone with the shoebox and her mother's absence. She turned around. "I want to meet Carlo," she said. Roman's face changed. I didn't ask for your assessment of whether it's advisable," she said. "I said I want to meet him. I want to look at the man who used me as a demolition instrument against his own family." She paused. "And then I want to talk about what we do next." "What we do next," Roman said carefully, "is a conversation for you and your people," she said. "Yes. I heard it before you said it." She walked back to the chair and stood behind it with her hands on its back. "That's not what's happening. What's happening is that you are going to sit there and listen to me, because I am your blood and I am standing in your house, and 3 hours ago I had a pharmacology exam to study for, and now I have a criminal organization that wants to put me on camera and a member of your family who arranged it, and—" She stopped. Not because she'd run out of things to say, because something had arrived in her voice that she didn't plan. Something hard and bright and cold, like metal that's been under pressure and has finally found its shape. She heard it herself and went quiet for a second to let it settle. Then, more controlled. "We are not going to hide, we are not going to negotiate. I don't know what we're going to do yet, but I know it is going to start with you telling me everything. Everything you've kept from me, everything about this organization, everything about Carlo, everything about the DeLucas and the Ports and the last 20 years. She held his gaze. "And then we're going to figure out how to end this." Roman Vescari sat behind his enormous desk in his stone fortress with its gated perimeter and its men in doorways and its maps of the Great Lakes shipping system on the walls, and looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he said, "Vincent." Raynor appeared in the doorway. "Close the gate. Pull everyone from the perimeter to interior positions, and get Carlo on the phone." He paused. "Tell him his niece wants to say hello." Kira's hands tightened on the back of the chair. Across the room, Adrian stood very still with his eyes on her face, watching something happen in it that he didn't have a name for yet. Some quality emerging from beneath the grief and the shock and the night's accumulated violence. Something that hadn't been visible in the library 3 hours ago when she'd asked to share his table and outlet. The frightened girl who'd run through the rain to study pharmacology was somewhere behind her eyes, getting smaller. What was replacing her was something that didn't have a name yet. Adrian watched it settle into her face the way weather settles into a landscape. Not a sudden change, but a fundamental shift in the quality of everything. The light, the temperature, the way the air moved. She stood behind the chair with her hands on its back and her jaw set and her eyes on Roman Vescari with an expression that was not his daughter asking for answers anymore. It was something older than that, something inherited. Roman saw it too. He looked at her the way a man looks at a mirror that shows him something he wasn't expecting to find. Then Vincent Raynor returned to the doorway. "Carlo isn't answering," he said. Roman's expression didn't change. "When did he last check in?" 4 hours ago. He said he was at the Merchandise Mart meeting with the Port Authority liaisons. "He wasn't," Roman said. "Not a question." "No," Vincent said. "I put 2 men on the building. He never went in." The room processed this quietly. 4 hours was enough time to do many things in Chicago. Enough time to move, to reposition, to make calls that needed to be made before a specific sequence of events reached its conclusion. "He knows," Kira said. Everyone looked at her. "He knows you found out," she said. "Whoever tipped you off to the surveillance photos. Carlo has the same information source working both directions. He knows his cover is broken. She released the chair back. He's not hiding. He's already moved to whatever the next phase is. Roman picked up his desk phone, dialed, waited. His face was doing the thing where it showed nothing, but his hand, the one not holding the phone, had closed on the desk edge with a pressure that was doing the work his face refused to do. 3 seconds. 4. Then he set the phone down and looked at Vincent. Pull Carmine and Doyle off the east perimeter and get them to Carlo's apartment on Dearborn. Now. He paused. Gently. And if he's not there? Then we have a problem that is no longer gentle. Vincent was already moving. Adrian had been standing near the wall since Kira's declaration, running the situation through the operational part of his mind that never fully shut off, mapping positions, identifying variables, calculating the rate at which a bad situation could become catastrophic. The rate was high. Carlo Viscari had a 4-hour head start on the knowledge that his play had been exposed. 4 hours was an eternity in a city where everything could be reorganized with a phone call, and a man who had been planning this kind of move for months would have contingencies stacked deep. He's going to Luca, Adrian said. Roman looked at him. Not to warn him, to accelerate the timeline. If Carlo's primary plan, using your daughter as leverage to collapse your position, has been exposed, he has one move left that still produces his desired outcome. He goes to Luca directly and offers him something better than the original plan. Adrian looked at Kira, then back at Roman. He offers him you, tonight, before you can consolidate a response. The room was very still. He'd have to give Luca a target, Roman said carefully. He has one, Adrian said. He knows about this meeting. He knows Kira came here. He knows this estate is where everyone converged tonight, which means Luca now knows exactly where to point. Roman stood up from behind the desk. It was not a dramatic movement, just a man getting to his feet, but the quality of it changed the room. Something had been decided behind his eyes. How long? He said. If Carlo made the call the moment he knew his cover was blown, maybe 3 hours to position, less if Luca already had assets staged. Adrian checked his watch. We have between 40 minutes and an hour before this perimeter means nothing. Then we have 40 minutes to make it mean something, Roman said. The estate's lower level opened into what had looked like a wine cellar from the main hallway and turned out to be something else entirely. Adrian came down the stairs behind Roman and stopped at the bottom. The room was long and low-ceilinged, stone walls, industrial lighting. Along the left wall was a weapons locker that ran floor to ceiling, long guns racked vertical, handguns on horizontal mounts, ammunition in labeled drawers beneath. Along the right wall was a communications setup that would have been modest by military standards and was extraordinary by any other measure. Multiple screens, radio equipment, a tactical map of Chicago's south and west sides lit up in blue and red overlays. 3 men were already in the room. They looked up when Roman entered and did not look surprised, which meant they'd been summoned before Roman had come back downstairs, which meant Roman had started moving before he'd appeared to start moving. Adrian logged this. The man worked in layers. Kira came down the stairs behind Adrian and stopped beside him at the bottom. She looked at the room, at the weapons, at the screens showing the city in tactical overlay. She didn't flinch. She studied. The DeLuca staging area's on the west side, she said, moving toward the tactical map without being invited. These red markers, are these current? One of the men looked at Roman. Roman nodded. Updated 2 hours ago, the man said. His name, Adrian would learn, was Brescia. 30 years with the Vescari organization, built like a piece of furniture, moved like something much lighter. We have live feeds from 4 intersection cameras in that corridor. The Fulton Market warehouse, Kira said. Is that in range? 2 blocks outside our camera coverage. Can we get coverage? Not in 40 minutes. She nodded, stepped back. Her eyes were moving across the map with a speed and pattern that Adrian watched carefully. She wasn't absorbing locations, she was reading relationships. The way certain positions clustered, the gaps between them, the corridors that ran between DeLuca-controlled zones and the estate. She was thinking like someone who had studied anatomy, systems, not individual parts. They'll come from the northwest, she said. That gap between your positions on Oakley and the unmonitored stretch on 31st. It's the only approach that gives them concealment from your perimeter cameras until they're within 2 blocks. Brescia looked at her with an expression that was carefully not surprised. Then he looked at Roman. "She's right," Roman said quietly. "I want a gun," Kira said. 3 of the men in the room reacted to this in 3 different ways. Brescia's eyebrow moved a fraction, the second man's mouth opened slightly, the third looked at the floor. Adrian said nothing. Roman said, "Have you fired before?" "No," she said, "but I've spent 2 years studying human physiology. I understand the difference between incapacitating and lethal force. I understand anatomical targeting, and I understand that if this room gets breached, I am not going to stand here and be useful to anyone as a hostage." She looked at him without apology. "Give me something with the safety and enough stopping power that I don't need to be precise." Roman held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he walked to the weapons locker, pulled out a short-barreled shotgun, checked its load, and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, checked its weight, found the safety, and clicked it twice to confirm the feel. Her hands were steady. She set it against the wall within reach. Adrian crossed to the locker and began loading without being asked. But the 40 minutes passed in the specific way that waiting time passes before violence. Not slowly and not quickly, but in a state that exists outside normal time, where every sound is too loud and the air has a quality like something pressed too flat. Roman had been on the phone for most of it, not frantic calls, the kind of calls that move things into position, that say 2 or 3 precise words to the right person and produce results that would take a civilian 20 conversations to arrange. By the time the first perimeter alert came in, 4 additional vehicles had quietly repositioned along the estate's exterior, and 3 of Roman's tactical teams had been placed in locations that hadn't existed as positions an hour ago. The alert came as a single tone from the communications setup. Brescia was at the screens. "Northwest approach," he said from Achi. 3 vehicles, moving slow. "Lights?" Roman said. "Off." Adrian was at Brescia's shoulder in 3 strides. On the screen, the intersection camera showed 3 dark shapes moving in convoy formation, spaced with the precision of people who had done convoy driving before. "DeLuca formation," he said. "Lead vehicle will stop short and deploy flankers before the second and third advance. They'll try to breach 2 points simultaneously, main gate and the south wall, which they know is the secondary perimeter." "How do you know their approach pattern?" one of Roman's men said. "Because I wrote half of it," Adrian said. He straightened, looked at Roman. "They're going to expect your response to be defensive. Gate reinforcement, interior consolidation." He paused. "They're not expecting offense." Roman was looking at the screen. "Say it." "We let the lead vehicle stop and deploy. The moment the flankers separate from the convoy, we close the approach behind them, cut the retreat route before they realize we've moved." He looked at the tactical map. "And we hit from the rooftops on Maplewood. The 2 buildings you control on that block. Crossfire into the approach corridor before anyone reaches the wall." "That leaves us outside our perimeter," Roman said. "Yes." "With my daughter in this building." "Your daughter," Adrian said carefully, "has a shotgun and knows where the femoral artery is, and the only way she stays safe tonight is if we stop these people before they reach the gate. A defensive engagement on your own perimeter means a sustained firefight. Someone gets through. Someone always gets through." He held Roman's gaze. "The warehouse play. The one Luca used for his own meetings. I know the corridors, the exits, the positions his people use. If we can lure the convoy to abort and retreat, we have a chance to control where they go." "Lure them how?" Roman said. "I make a call," Adrian said, "to Luca directly. I tell him I have Kira. I tell him I'm bringing her in personally, and I need the convoy to stand down." He paused. "He won't believe me immediately, but he'll want to, and the 30 seconds he spends deciding will be enough." Kira had been listening from across the room. She walked over. "He'll want proof," she said. "Yes," Adrian said. "Then we give him proof." She looked at Roman. "Do you have a recording setup that can fake a location?" Roman looked at Brescia. Brescia said, 5 minutes. "Do it," Kira said. Roman looked at his daughter with the expression he kept almost managing to suppress. the one that was equal parts recognition and something that lived in the same neighborhood as grief, though it had been there long enough to have stopped being acute. "You understand," he said, "that if Luca doesn't believe the call, then we're in the same position we're already in," she said. "Except with less time and no plan." She picked up the shotgun. "So let's make him believe it." Adrian made the call from the communications room with a background track of road noise playing through a speaker. Brescia had it set up in 4 minutes, not 5. And Luca De Luca answered on the second ring, which told Adrian the man had been sitting with his phone in his hand for the last half hour. "I have her," Adrian said. Silence. 3 seconds. "Where are you?" "Heading south. She's secured. Tell your people on the northwest approach to stand down. If they hit the estate now and she's not in it, you lose the leverage and start a war you can't win tonight." Longer silence this time. Adrian could hear breathing on the line. Luca's, fast and slightly uneven, the breathing of a man trying to balance greed against suspicion. "Proof," Luca said. Adrian nodded to Kira. She leaned toward the secondary microphone. Brescia had positioned it at exactly the right angle, and said with a flatness that was its own kind of performance, "It's her. Tell him to stop the convoy." Adrian watched Luca process the voice. 20 seconds. The longest 20 seconds he had experienced in recent memory, and he had experienced several categories of long second in his life. "Pull the Northwest team back to the staging point," Luca said finally. Not to Adrian, to someone else in the room with him. Then back into the phone. "How long until you're here?" 40 minutes, Adrian said. "I need you to clear the Fulton Market access, the east entrance, not the main." "Why?" "Because I'm not walking her through your front door in a way that every camera on that block records. That's a problem for both of us." Another pause. "The east access will be open," Luca said. 40 minutes. Adrian ended the call. The room breathed. "He pulled the convoy," Brescia said from the screens. "Northwest approach is stopping. Vehicles reversing." Kira set the shotgun down on the table, her hands still steady. "He thinks we're coming to him." "Yes," Adrian said. "Then we need to be there first," she said. Adrian looked at her. "Kira, I know what you're going to say." "You're not going to the warehouse." "No," she said. "I'm going to get ahead of it." She turned to Roman. "The warehouse in Fulton Market, you know it?" "I know every building in that corridor," Roman said carefully. "Then you know the rooftop access on the building directly north." A beat. Roman looked at Brescia. "Brescia, we own the building directly north." Something moved across Roman's face. He looked at his daughter with the expression of a man watching a door open that he hadn't known was a door. "The crossfire position Adrian mentioned," Kira said. "It doesn't work on a residential approach, but it works perfectly in an industrial corridor with one access point." She looked at Adrian. "You told Luca 40 minutes. His people will be staged and ready for a handoff, not a firefight. The moment he realizes we're not coming, he'll try to run," Adrian said, "or fight. Probably both." "How many men does he typically stage for an operation like this?" 6 to 10. He keeps his inner circle small." "And the convoy that just pulled back, where does it go?" "Staging point," Adrian said. "Probably the parking structure on Randolph. 15 minutes from Fulton Market if he calls them back in." "Then we have a window," she said, "before the convoy can reposition." She looked at her father. "Can you have people on that rooftop in 20 minutes? Roman Viscari sat back slowly in his chair. He looked at the tactical map, then at his daughter, then at Adrian with an expression that was asking a question without asking it. Adrian answered it. "She's right about the geometry. The east entrance to that warehouse is a kill corridor if you control the roof. Luca won't see it until it's done. And you," Roman said to Adrian, "you go in through the east entrance and keep his attention forward." "Yes." "As the man delivering his package?" "Yes. Knowing that the moment he looks at you without my daughter beside you, he'll know the call was false." "Yes," Adrian said. "That's the part where the timing has to be exact." The room held a specific quality of silence, the kind that precedes commitment, when everyone in the space has run their calculation to its end and arrived at the same place. Roman stood up. He walked to the weapons locker. He He selected a pistol, checked it, holstered it. Then he turned to Brescia and spoke quickly. Names, positions, specific streets, and specific timings. In the flat, economical language of a man who had done this before and knew that excess words in the operational phase cost lives. Then he turned to Kira. "You stay here," he said. She met his eyes. "No." "Kira, I will stay back from the active position," she said. "I will stay in the vehicle, away from the approach corridor, but I am not sitting in this house while—" She stopped, controlled something, started again. "I have spent 20 years sitting in places while the people around me made decisions about my life without telling me. That is finished. I go." Roman held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "You stay in the vehicle until Brescia gives the all-clear. Non-negotiable." "Agreed," she said, quickly enough that both men heard the precision in it, not submission, a tactical concession. Adrian caught her eyes over Roman's shoulder. She looked back at him with an expression that was composed and alert, and entirely unlike the exhausted nursing student he'd watched drink cold coffee in a library that now felt like it belonged to a different version of history. He thought about Sal. He thought about 6 years of orders from a man who'd been running a parallel game the entire time, feeding information in both directions, managing outcomes like a conductor manages an orchestra, not for the music, but for his own survival. He thought about the particular feeling of having your operating reality reconstructed from the ground up in a single evening, and how it felt less like betrayal and more like diagnosis. The disease had always been there. Now he had a name for it. He pulled on his jacket, checked his weapon, looked at the tactical map one more time. The Fulton Market warehouse was 11 minutes away. Luca DeLuca was in it, waiting for a delivery that wasn't coming. And somewhere in the city, Carlo Vescari was either running or preparing for whatever came next. Either outcome of tonight's operation, the one that ended with Luca in control of the port contracts, or the one that ended with Luca broken, Carlo had a version of himself that survived. He'd built it that way. Men like Carlo always built it that way. Adrian walked to the stairs and stopped. "Roman," he said. Roman looked at him. "Carlo went to ground 4 hours ago. When this is done, whatever happens tonight in that warehouse, Carlo is still out there." "I know," Roman said. "He'll have a move ready, something that doesn't require Luca." "I know that too." Roman picked up his phone. "I've been managing my brother for 30 years, Moretti. Tonight just changes which category of management applies." Adrian looked at him for another moment. Then he went up the stairs. Behind him, he heard Kira's footsteps. Steady, unhurried, the footsteps of someone who had stopped running away and started moving toward. The convoy of 3 vehicles left the estate through the main gate at 11:47, moving northwest through light traffic toward Fulton Market, lights on and pace deliberate, nothing about them announcing urgency to anyone watching from the street. In the lead vehicle, Roman Vescari sat in the back with Vincent Reiner beside him and his phone in his hand, coordinating positions in the flat murmur that was his operational voice. In the second vehicle, Adrian drove alone, running the warehouse approach in his head. The east entrance, the kill corridor, the rooftop position that would need to be established before Luca's people could identify a threat from above. The timing window was narrow. It would require Luca's attention to be fully forward when the rooftop teams activated, and Luca's attention would be forward because he would be looking at the east entrance waiting for Adrian to walk through it with Roman Vescari's daughter. Instead, he was going to walk through it alone, with no backup behind him and a rooftop team that had to be precisely on time or the math stopped working entirely. In the third vehicle, Kira sat in the back seat with the Vescari man called Brescia beside her and the shotgun on the seat, and her pharmacology notes still in her bag because she'd grabbed the bag when they left the library and hadn't put it down since. And somewhere in the back of her mind, underneath everything that had happened tonight, there was a faint, absurd awareness of the pharmacology exam on Thursday morning that nobody was going to be studying for. She looked out the window at Chicago moving past, the lit windows, the late bars, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know what was being decided in its industrial corridors tonight and would not know tomorrow and would go on not knowing, which was probably how it was supposed to work. She thought about her mother. She thought about what her mother had built, the small apartment, the double shifts, the sealed checks, the silence, and understood for the first time that it had not been limitation. It had been architecture, a structure designed to hold one specific thing in place for as long as possible, a structure that had held for 20 years and had finally been found and dismantled by a man named Carlo from the inside. Her mother had protected her from this world for 20 years. Tonight, Kira was going to return the favor in the only way still available. The vehicle turned onto Randolph Street, and the dark mass of the Fulton Market Industrial District rose ahead of them, and Brescia said quietly, 5 minutes. Kira's hand rested on the shotgun. Her heartbeat was slow. Slower than it should have been, slower than made physiological sense given what was about to happen, and she recognized this from her clinicals. The paradoxical calm of a system that has processed all available threat data and arrived at the other side of fear into something that was not bravery exactly, but was what bravery was made from. The vehicle stopped, 2 blocks from the east entrance to the warehouse. Brescia's radio clicked twice. He looked at it, looked at her. "Rooftop team is in position," he said. She nodded. Ahead of them, in the dark of the Fulton Market corridor, Adrian's vehicle turned the last corner and Adrian's headlights went off. Not cut. Gone. The way lights go when a vehicle stops being a vehicle and becomes a position. The Audi sat at the mouth of the east corridor like a held breath, and for 4 seconds nothing in the Fulton Market district moved except the wind off the river, cold and carrying the smell of iron and old water. Then Adrian got out. He stood beside the car in the dark and looked at the east entrance to the warehouse. A steel door set into brick, lit by a single cage light above the frame, amber and throwing shadows that cut hard across the loading dock concrete. The door was closed, which meant Luca's people were inside and waiting, and the question of what happened in the next 90 seconds would determine everything that followed or would not follow. He walked toward the door. His footsteps on the concrete were the only sound. Not silence. The city was never silent. There was always the low-frequency hum of it somewhere beneath everything, but the kind of concentrated quiet that happens when everyone in a space is holding still and holding breath. He knew his rooftop team was in position on the building to the north. He knew Brescia had confirmed it. He knew the geometry was right. Knowing and trusting were 2 different rooms in the same building, and right now he was standing in the hallway between them. He knocked on the steel door 3 times. Standard. It opened immediately, which told him Luca had men with eyes on the approach, and they'd been watching him cross the loading dock. The man who opened it was someone Adrian recognized. Thick neck, shaved head, a scar across the left cheekbone that he'd gotten in a warehouse fight 3 years ago. His name was Dominic, and he had the intelligence of someone trained to do exactly one thing well, and do it without deviation. Dominic looked at Adrian, then he looked past him at the empty loading dock. "Where is she?" he said. "Inside the car," Adrian said. "Secured. I'm not walking her in until I see Luca in the room." Dominic's eyes came back to him, reading something, not satisfied with what they found. "Wait," Dominic said. He stepped back inside and the door didn't close all the way, which meant Adrian was meant to hear the conversation that followed. Meant to hear Dominic's voice, low and fast, saying he's alone, she's in the car, and then a pause. And then another voice, further back in the space, saying something Adrian couldn't parse. He used the seconds to read the door frame. Steel reinforced. The hinges were interior, which meant the door opened inward. He counted what he could see of the interior through the gap. 3 men visible, 2 more positions he could infer from the light angles. 5 minimum, possibly 8. He thought about the rooftop team. He thought about 40 minutes. He thought about Kira in the 3rd vehicle, 2 blocks back with a shotgun across her lap, and Brescia beside her, and the specific expression on her face when she'd looked at him over Roman's shoulder in the estate study, composed and alert, and entirely finished with being protected. The door opened. "Come in," Dominic said. Adrian went in. Quotes. The warehouse interior was what it had always been. Concrete floor, high ceiling, the kind of industrial space that had been built for function and inherited purpose. Luca DeLuca had been using it for meetings because it had no windows at ground level and 3 exit points that his people controlled, which made it feel secure and made it, tonight, a trap. Luca was standing near the center of the floor. He was 34 years old and looked like someone had assembled him from components selected for intimidation and then given the result enough money to never develop patience. Dark suit, No tie? The particular posture of a man who expected the room to arrange itself around him. He looked at Adrian, then at the empty space beside Adrian where Kira was supposed to be. The silence lasted exactly as long as it took Luca to run the calculation. "She's not in the car," he said. Not a question. "No," Adrian said. The room moved, all of it simultaneously. The 5 visible men shifting to positions, hands going to jackets, the specific choreography of a space preparing for violence. Adrian had his hands visible at his sides and did not reach for anything, because the moment he reached for anything, he was dead before he cleared the holster, and that was not how tonight was going to go. "You called me from the road," Luca said. His voice had gone very even, which was worse than anger. "You had her in the car." "I had a microphone and a woman willing to say 4 words," Adrian said. "I needed you to pull back the Northwest convoy. You did." Luca looked at him for a long moment. Something was moving behind his eyes. Rage contained by the specific intelligence of a man who understood that acting on rage immediately was how you made mistakes. He was calculating, running the implications. And somewhere in the calculation, Adrian watched the moment Luca arrived at the right answer. "The rooftop," Luca said. And then the north wall of the warehouse above them detonated inward. Not an explosion. A coordinated breach, 3 points simultaneously. The kind of entry that required practice and timing, and people who had done it before. The cage lights in the ceiling swayed, and one of them blew out, and in the strobing confusion of the first 2 seconds, Adrian moved. He went left, hard, away from Dominic's position, putting the support column between himself and the nearest gun. He drew in the same motion. Not elegant, nothing about it was elegant. It was the move of a man who had trained it until the training became reflex, and the reflex became the thing that kept him alive. He came around the column and found a target and fired twice, and didn't look at the result because there were 4 more positions to account for. Above, Roman's rooftop team was fast roping through the breached north wall, which meant the shooting was coming from above and behind Luca's men, the crossfire position that Adrian had described from the estate's tactical room. And the geometry of it was exactly what he'd said it would be, which meant Luca's people had approximately 4 seconds before they understood that their exit points were no longer exit points. Luca ran, not away from the fight, toward the south exit, which was the move of a man who knew his building, who had always known his building, who had positioned the south exit specifically as his personal extraction route in any scenario where the room turned wrong. Adrian saw him go. He went after him. The south exit led to a service corridor and then to a secondary loading bay that opened onto the alley behind the building. By the time Adrian came through the service corridor door, Luca was already at the bay door. A rolling steel shutter, electric, and he had the fob in his hand and the shutter was halfway up, winter air pouring through the gap. Adrian covered the distance at a run and took Luca from behind just as he was ducking under the rising shutter, and they went down together on the concrete of the loading bay, Luca's fob skittering away, the shutter continuing its mechanical ascent above them. Luca was not a man who didn't fight. He was 34 and maintained himself, and he fought the way cornered men fight. Without technique, with everything, with the particular ferocity of someone who has never actually been in this position before and has decided that the rules are different now. He got an elbow into Adrian's jaw that snapped his head back and rolled clear, and was on his feet before Adrian fully processed the impact. Adrian's jaw was ringing. He stood up. They looked at each other in the cold half-dark of the loading bay, with the shutter fully open now, and the alley beyond it and the distant sounds of the firefight still working itself out in the warehouse behind them. Luca had a gun. He'd had it the whole time and he hadn't drawn it, and now he drew it. Adrian still had his. They stood 12 feet apart with weapons raised in the alley behind Luca and the service corridor behind Adrian, and the specific understanding that at 12 feet with both men in motion, outcome was not guaranteed to either side. "You're done," Adrian said. His jaw was going to bruise badly. "The warehouse is gone. Your convoy is cut off. Roman Viscari is in this building right now." "Roman Viscari," Luca said, and something in his voice had changed. The calculation was gone, replaced by something rawer, is going to spend the rest of his life watching his back because of tonight. Because of what Carlo and I built. "You think this ends here? You think—" "Carlo is in custody," a voice said from the alley. Luca turned. Kira was standing at the mouth of the alley. She had come in from the south, from the vehicle that had been staged 2 blocks back, and she was holding the shotgun at low ready, the way someone holds something they've decided they're prepared to use. Beside her was Brescia, who had his weapon up and was not holding it at low ready. Behind Luca, blocking the service corridor, Adrian. Luca turned back to Adrian. The calculation was happening again. Very fast now, running options that were closing one by one like lights going out in a building at night. "Carlo," Luca said. "Roman's men picked him up 40 minutes ago," Kira said. "He was at a hotel on Michigan Avenue. He'd been there for 3 hours. He had a bag packed and a car waiting in the garage." "He was running," Adrian said. "He was running," Kira confirmed. "Whatever he told you about the endgame, his plan was always to let you carry the weight of this and collect from whatever was left." Luca's weapon was still up, but something had changed in the way he was holding it. The slight shift that happens when the body starts to understand what the mind hasn't finished processing yet. "Carlo told you what?" Adrian said. "That after this he'd help you rebuild? That he had insurance on both sides? That if the play failed, there was a contingency?" Luca said nothing. "He said the same thing to Roman's organization," Kira said. "He had a version of himself that survived every possible outcome. Yours wasn't it. The weapon came down 2 inches. Just 2. But 2 inches was the tell." "Put it on the ground," Brescia said, and his voice had the flat authority of someone who has said this before and knows precisely what comes after if the answer is wrong. Luca De Luca stood in the cold alley behind his warehouse in Fulton Market for 5 more seconds. 5 seconds of the calculation running its last iteration, finding no exit it hadn't already found and lost. He put the gun on the ground. Bad. The warehouse was secured in 20 minutes. 4 of Luca's men were down, 2 dead, 2 wounded, and being held by Roman's team inside. The rest had scattered through exit points that Roman's people had covered, and 2 of them had been picked up on the street before they'd gone 2 blocks. Dominic had been found in the northeast corner behind a pallet stack, uninjured, sitting with his back against the wall and his hands visible, having arrived at a decision about the night's arithmetic somewhat faster than his employer. Roman Viscari walked through the warehouse with Vincent Rayner beside him and looked at what it had become without apparent emotion, which Kira, watching him from the doorway, understood was not absence of feeling, but the particular discipline of a man who had learned that feeling. Things in the operational phase cost you the operational phase. She watched him stop in the center of the floor where Luca had been standing 40 minutes ago. He looked at the ceiling where the breach points were still open to the cold night sky. He looked at the concrete floor. He looked at the geometry of the space, the positions his people had taken, the angles, the way it had played out. Then he looked at his daughter in the doorway. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The warehouse around them had the particular quality of aftermath. Not peaceful, nothing like peaceful, but the cessation of acute pressure. The specific atmosphere of a situation that has resolved into its consequences. "Carlo," she said. "At the estate," he said. "Under guard." "What happens to him?" A pause that contained everything the answer would need to hold. "That," Roman said, "is a conversation for when we're not standing in a crime scene." "It's going to be that conversation whether we stand here or somewhere else," she said. "What happens to him?" Roman looked at her. He walked toward the doorway and she stepped aside to let him through, and they stood together in the service corridor with the sounds of his men working behind them. "He's my brother," Roman said. "He tried to have me tortured on camera." "Yes." "He gave my identity to an organization that planned to kill me after they'd used me to break you." "Yes." "And he's your brother," she said. "So say the rest of it." Roman was quiet for a moment. The corridor was cold, the exterior door at the far end still open, winter air moving through. In the amber light from the single working overhead fixture, Roman Viscari looked his age for the first time tonight, not diminished by it, just carrying it honestly, the way the building carried the years of use in its walls. "What I do with Carlo," he said carefully, "is what I've always done with problems that are also family. I find the solution that removes the problem without pretending the family part doesn't exist. He paused. That's not mercy. It's accounting. He'll do it again, Kira said, in 3 years or 5, when he's rebuilt something and found another angle. No, Roman said. He won't. The way he said it closed the subject, not with threat, with the specific finality of a man stating a fact about a future he's already decided. Kira looked at him for a moment longer, then let it go, because she understood that there were categories of decision that were his and not hers, and that identifying the line between them was part of what tonight had been about. I want to talk about what comes next, she said. Tonight? When I've slept, she said, and showered, and eaten something that isn't vending machine coffee. Something moved in Roman's face. Not a smile exactly. The territory that exists just before a smile, held in reserve by a man who has spent decades not showing things in corridors and warehouses. Tomorrow, he said, come to the estate. I'll come, she said. But I'm not moving in. I have an apartment. I have an exam on Thursday. He looked at her. You're still going to I'm going to take my pharmacology exam on Thursday, she said. And then we're going to sit down and you're going to tell me everything about this organization. Everything. Not the version you'd tell a soldier or a lawyer or a reporter. The actual version. She met his eyes. Because if I'm going to be part of whatever this is, I need to understand what I'm part of. And if I decide I'm not going to be part of it, I need to understand that too. And if you decide, Roman said slowly, that you want no part of it, then that's what I decide, she said. And you don't send men to follow me. The pause was long enough to mean something. Agreed, he said. She nodded, looked back into the warehouse where his men were moving through the space with the efficiency of people doing a job they'd done before. Luca, she said, he goes to your people or to the police? There are no police in this situation, Roman said. Not defensively, just as a statement of the terrain. Then what happens to him? He'll be held, questioned. There are things I need to know about the arrangement between him and Carlo. Specifically what was promised, what was transferred, what damage has been done to the shipping infrastructure while this was being built. Roman paused. After that, he becomes a problem that is managed. Managed, she repeated. In a way that ensures he is no longer a problem, Roman said. That's as specific as I'm prepared to be in a corridor at midnight. Kira absorbed this. She had grown up in a world where problems were solved by working harder, sleeping less, taking extra shifts, and accepting the reality of what was available. She was standing in a world where problems of a different kind were solved by different mechanisms, and the mechanisms were not clean and were not her mother's world and would never be her mother's world. Her mother had understood this, had spent 20 years building a wall between Kira and the understanding. Tonight the wall was rubble. The question, the only question left that mattered, was what you built in the space where a wall used to be. Adrian was outside. He was sitting on the loading dock edge, with his jacket on and his weapon holstered and a bruise forming along his jaw that was going to be significant by morning. He had a split on his left hand he hadn't noticed getting somewhere in the warehouse, on the concrete or on a door frame, and he was holding it closed with pressure from his right thumb and not thinking about it particularly. He heard her footsteps on the dock behind him and didn't turn around. She sat down beside him, not close, not far. The appropriate distance for two people who had been through something together and hadn't yet decided what the something made them to each other. The alley beyond the loading dock was empty now. Roman's vehicles had moved. Luca's remaining men had been collected. The city around them was doing what Chicago did at 1 a.m. in November, existing with its particular indifference, the lights going on and off in buildings for reasons that had nothing to do with tonight, the distant sound of a train on elevated tracks somewhere to the east. Your hand, she said. It's fine. It's not fine. It needs to be cleaned and closed properly. Tomorrow. Adrian. He looked at her then. She was looking at his hand with the clinical attention she brought to everything physical, assessing, categorizing, already calculating the treatment sequence. Tomorrow, he said again, but quieter. She looked up from his hand to his face. The bruise on his jaw was visible even in the dim ambient light of the alley. She reached out and put 2 fingers against it. Light, diagnostic, the touch of someone checking bone structure beneath swelling. He went very still. "Not broken," she said, "but you'll want ice." "I'll get ice," he said. She withdrew her hand, looked out at the alley. They sat in the specific silence of people who have said things that can't be unsaid and done things that can't be undone and are now in the territory after, where the landscape is different and the maps are gone. "Sal," she said. He exhaled. "Yes." "Roman's people will find him." "They already have," Adrian said. "Brescia got the confirmation 20 minutes ago. Sal was at his apartment. He didn't try to run." He paused. "I don't know if that means he thought there was a version of this where he came out the other side, or if he just got old and tired. What do you think?" "I think," Adrian said carefully, "that Sal Greco spent 22 years in an organization that was always going to end badly, and he made choices along the way that looked like survival, and turned out to be something slower." He looked at the alley. "I'm familiar with the pattern." She looked at him. "You pulled me out of a library," she said. "You told me the truth when it would have been easier not to. You walked into that warehouse alone." "I also surveilled you for 6 weeks," he said, "and spent 6 years doing things I don't have the luxury of calling mistakes because I knew what they were when I did them." "Yes," she said. "That's true." He looked at her, slightly surprised by the absence of softening. "I'm not absolving you," she said. "I'm accounting for the whole thing. The 6 weeks, and the library, and the warehouse, and everything in between." She paused. "You're complicated. That's not the same as being unforgivable." He was quiet for a moment. "What's the difference?" "Complicated means there's still a choice being made," she said. "Unforgivable means the choices are done." She looked back at the alley. "You're still choosing, so am I." The wind moved through the corridor between buildings, cold and direct. Adrian turned his split hand over and looked at it, and then stopped looking at it and let it rest on his knee. "What happens now?" he said. "To you?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm going to take an exam Thursday. I'm going to sleep for approximately 11 hours before that, and then I'm going to sit across from a man I've known for about 5 hours and try to understand what it means that he's my father and what I want from that and what I'm willing to give it." She exhaled slowly. "And somewhere in all of that, I'm going to figure out what I actually want." "What did you want?" Adrian said, before tonight. She thought about it. Not performing thought, actually going back to it, to the library and the textbooks and the cold coffee and the quiet grinding work of a life built on survival and not much else. "I wanted to finish school," she said. "I wanted to be good at something that helped people. I wanted to stop being tired all the time." She paused. "I wanted my mother to still be alive." He said nothing to that. There was nothing to say to it. "2 of those are still possible," she said. 3, maybe, depending on how things go." She turned her head and looked at him directly. "What did you want?" He didn't answer immediately. He sat with the question the way he sat with most things, not avoiding it, just taking the full weight of it before responding. "Out," he said finally. "I wanted out. I've wanted out for about 2 years. I just hadn't found the reason to make it real." He stopped, tried again. "In that life, wanting something isn't enough. You need something that makes the cost of wanting it acceptable, something that changes the calculation." She held his gaze. "And did you find it?" He looked at her for a long moment in the cold amber half-light of a Fulton Market loading dock at 1:30 in the morning, with the bruise going dark along his jaw and the split on his hand, and 6 years of a life he was done with sitting somewhere behind his eyes, like furniture waiting to be moved out of a space that was going to be empty for a while before it was anything else. "Working on it," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she stood up, brushing concrete dust from the back of her coat. "Come on," she said. "We need to get your hand looked at and your jaw iced, and I need to eat something before I say anything else to anyone tonight, or I'm going to stop being reasonable." He stood up beside her. "You've been unreasonably reasonable this entire time." "I've been holding it together," she said. "There's a difference. The holding together is structural, not permanent." She looked at him. I'm going to fall apart at some point. Probably in about 4 hours when the adrenaline clears and I'm alone in my apartment looking at the pharmacology notes I was highlighting when all of this started. And that's fine. That's allowed. She paused. But I'm not doing it in an alley. No, he agreed. Not in an alley. They walked back into the warehouse together and through it to the north where Roman's vehicles were staged, and nobody said anything about the fact that they were walking side by side, which was its own kind of statement in a room full of people who noticed everything. Oi, Roman Viscari's estate at 3 a.m. had the quality of a house coming down from something. Not peaceful, not tense, but in the specific state of aftermath where the machinery is stopped and the silence that follows isn't absence, but presence of a different kind. Men moved through it quietly, reporting in low voices, handling the logistics of a night that would need to be processed and documented and accounted for in ways that existed entirely outside the legal system. Carlo Viscari was in a room on the ground floor. Kira went to the doorway and looked at him. He was 62 years old. He looked like his brother, the way certain shadows look like the objects that cast them. The same structure, but something inverted. Something that had turned toward the wrong light for too long and taken on a different quality. He was sitting in a chair with his wrists zip-tied in front of him and his jacket rumpled, and his hair, normally immaculate, pushed sideways. He had the look of a man who had arrived at the end of something he'd been building for a long time and found that the end looked nothing like the thing he'd been building toward. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She said nothing for a moment. She looked at him with the clinical attention she brought to everything, reading his face, his posture, the particular quality of his stillness. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he said, "but you knew who I was, what I was. You knew what it would cost and what it would do." He said nothing. "I want you to understand something," she said. "Not for your benefit, for mine." She stood in the doorway with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at her uncle, a word she was still getting used to the shape of, and spoke with the evenness she had been building toward all night, the thing on the other side of fear that was not anger and not forgiveness, but something more fundamental than either. "My mother spent 20 years protecting me from this world. She worked double shifts in a hospital. She drove a 12-year-old car. She kept 41 sealed checks in a shoebox because she would not take money from it. She built a life that had nothing to do with any of this, with your brother, with the organization, with any of it, so that I could be someone who didn't have to make the choices she made, or the choices he made." Kira paused. "You took that. Not from me. I'm still standing, but from her. You took the thing she spent her whole life building, and you used it as a lever, and she's not alive to know that it didn't work." Carlo Viscari looked at her. Something was happening in his face. Not remorse exactly, but the involuntary expression of a man encountering a truth he'd successfully avoided looking at until this moment. "Whatever Roman decides to do with you," she said, "I don't have a vote in it. That's between you and him and whatever you owe each other after 60 years. But I needed you to hear that from me, directly." She straightened. "That's all." She turned and walked back down the corridor. Behind her, Carlo said nothing. There was nothing to say. She hadn't left him an opening, and she'd done it deliberately, and as she walked, she felt something shift in the architecture of the night. Something closing, not in a way that meant healed, but in the way a wound closes, which is different and is its own kind of done. She left the estate at 3:45. Adrian drove her, because it was his car, and because nobody suggested otherwise, and because they had been through enough together that the logistics of the night sorted themselves around them without requiring discussion. The city was thin at this hour. Just the night buses and the late workers and the particular population of Chicago at 4 a.m, which was its own city inside the city, quieter and more honest. Her apartment building was on Calumet, 3rd floor, the kind of building that had been old for a long time and had arrived somewhere on the other side of old that wasn't charming but was solid. He pulled to the curb and left the engine running. She didn't move immediately. She was looking at the building, at the lit lobby beyond the glass door, the familiar shape of it, the ordinary architecture of the life she'd been living 24 hours ago, and was going to go back into now and find fundamentally altered in ways that were invisible from the outside. The building looked the same. The pharmacology notes were probably still on the floor where she'd put them before she left. The coffee maker would be cold. "Thursday," she said. "What?" "The exam. I'm going to pass it." She said it with a certainty that was not bravado, just the statement of someone accounting for what's real. "Whatever else is happening, I'm going to pass the exam." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You don't know that." "I know you," he said, then paused, corrected himself. "I know enough." She held his gaze for a moment. The bruise on his jaw had developed fully now, dark along the bone, and the split on his hand had been cleaned and taped at the estate by one of Roman's people, adequately, if not well. He looked like someone who had come through something, which was accurate, and was also something she was looking at from the same direction. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Tomorrow, after tonight." "I need to figure out where I stand," he said. "The DeLuca organization it's going to have to reorganize after tonight, which means there's going to be a period of instability where people are choosing sides and settling accounts. I'm not going to be part of that." "You're done with it," she said. "I've been done with it," he said. "Tonight just made it formal." "And after the formality?" "I don't know yet," he said. "That's honest." "I know it is," she said. She looked at the building again. "Roman is going to ask you to work for him." Adrian was quiet. "You don't have to answer that now," she said. "But when he asks, and he will, because you know things, and you prove tonight that you're capable and you don't have anywhere else to be. Think about it carefully, because that world has a gravity." She paused. "I know that better than I did yesterday." "What will you do?" he said. "When he asks you." She thought about the estate and the tactical maps and the weapons locker and the rooftop teams and the specific efficiency with which Roman Vescari moved through a crisis, the way he organized people and information and force with the naturalness of someone born to it and trained by 40 years of consequence. She thought about her mother's shoebox. She thought about what she was going to build in the space where a wall used to be. "I'm going to finish my degree," she said. "Whatever else happens, I'm going to finish my degree, and I'm going to become a nurse, and I'm going to be good at it. Because that's what my mother built, and I'm not going to let tonight take it from her." She paused. "And I'm going to understand what my father's world is, clearly. Not from outside it, not from the protected version he'd prefer me to have, but the actual version. And then I'm going to make a decision with full information." "And if the decision is no?" "Then it's no," she said. "And if it's not no, then I'll need to understand what yes actually means, what it costs, what it makes me." She looked at him. "I'm not afraid of it. I was, earlier tonight, in the library, before you told me anything. I was afraid of something I couldn't name. Now I have names for everything. That's better, even when the names are hard." He nodded slowly. "Go sleep," he said. "You too." She opened the car door and cold air came in from the street. Then she stopped, looked back at him over her shoulder with the expression he'd first seen in a dark alley behind a library, the one that held its ground. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah." "Thank you," she said, "for the library, for everything after it." He looked at her. "I spent 6 weeks building a profile on you for people who wanted to hurt you. And then you didn't let them," she said. "People are the whole of what they do, not just the part you're most ashamed of." She held his eyes for a moment. "The whole of it." She got out of the car, walked to her building door, put her key in the lock, and went inside without looking back, and the lobby light made a brief rectangle on the wet sidewalk before the door closed, and the night was just the night again. Adrian sat at the curb for a moment. He sat with the engine running and the heater going and the city quiet around him and let the night settle into its final shape, the shape of something that had been building toward this without him knowing it was building. 6 weeks of surveillance that had turned into the single most consequential night of his life, by mechanisms he couldn't have predicted and wouldn't have chosen and couldn't regret, which was its own category of thing. He thought about Sal, about the calls he'd taken for 6 years, the orders he'd executed, the things he'd told himself about the life he was living and why it was the only life available to someone made the way he was made. He thought about 2 tours and the specific things they'd done to him and the specific ways he'd used the damage afterward. As justification, as permission, as the reason he was the kind of man he was and couldn't be expected to be otherwise. He put the car in gear. He drove north through the empty city, past the lit windows of the buildings that contained other people's ordinary lives, past the night buses and the late restaurants and the particular Chicago landscape at 4 in the morning that had been the backdrop of his life for 6 years, and would be different now in the way that backdrops become different when the thing in front of them changes. He didn't know what came next. That was true, and he held it as true without the anxiety it would have produced 48 hours ago. Because 48 hours ago, he was a DeLuca enforcer who had not yet sat across a table from a nursing student in broken boots and watched her decide in the space of 30 seconds to trust a man who had just told her he was her enemy. He knew some things. He knew that Roman Vescari was going to call him by the end of the week. He knew that the call would be a question that was also an offer that was also a test. He knew that what he said to it would determine the next significant portion of his life. He knew that a woman on the 3rd floor of a building on Calumet Avenue was going to pass a pharmacology exam on Thursday. He knew that the city around him was not clean and had never been clean and was not going to become clean because of anything that had happened tonight. One organization's leadership was broken and another's had been strengthened, and the machinery of the city's criminal infrastructure would absorb both facts and reorganize around them the way water reorganizes around anything you put in it or take out. He knew that he had walked out of a life tonight. He did not know yet what he was walking into. That was all right. For the first time in a long time, not knowing felt like space rather than absence. Like a room that had been emptied of everything it had held so long the holding had become invisible. You didn't know how much weight you were carrying until the moment you weren't carrying it, and then the lightness was strange and took some getting used to. He drove north through Chicago at 4 in the morning. The city held him in its amber glow, its wet streets, its 10,000 lit windows containing 10,000 ordinary lives going on in the ordinary dark. He did not belong to it yet, not to this version of it, the version that existed above the machinery, that took the bus and studied pharmacology and drove 12-year-old cars and kept faith with the small, dignified architecture of a life built by honest hands. But he was moving in that direction. That was new. That was enough for 4 in the morning, with a bruised jaw and a split hand and the particular clarity that comes only after everything has been taken down to the ground, and you can finally see what the ground is made of. He kept driving. The city kept being the city. And somewhere in its 10,000 windows, the ordinary dark held people who would never know that tonight, in an industrial corridor in Fulton Market, something had ended that had needed to end, and something else was beginning that didn't have a name yet and was better that way. Unnamed things hold their shape longer. They survive the fire. 1 week later, a deed of purchase was filed with the Cook County Recorder's Office. The buyer was listed as a holding company with no public-facing officers. The property was the Harmon Medical Library at Blackthorn University. The deed included a covenant requiring the library to be renamed the Margaret Vale Collection and to provide free, unrestricted access to all enrolled nursing and medical students in perpetuity, regardless of financial standing. The filing clerk who processed it noted it was the only deed she'd handled that week with no signature from the purchasing officer, just an initial.